Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg, and this is It's Okay to Be Old, a show about all things aging well. Well, with us today is Vic Caldarola. He has a PhD in communication studies and has spent much of his career involved working with returning citizens, aka ex-offenders. It's a branch of corrections known as reentry. Vic retired as a trainer and administrator for Maryland's parole and probation agents. He now writes and leads men's groups in Maryland that feature meditation and discussion. Welcome, Vic.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Vic, I specifically brought you on for your expertise in working with men because I want to learn and share with our audience about what is causing these very alarming statistics on loneliness. Not only in our country, but it seems to be worldwide. And I'm just trying to figure out what we can do about it. One of my top questions, and I think people discuss this all the time, do men experience loneliness differently as compared to women?
Well, yes, I think they do. And I think this has become obvious since most studies now show that men and women um, are are equally lonely. And so there appears to be a significant difference in the way men experience loneliness.
We all know that there's a dwindling support, from family, just due to the fact that many of us live away from our families and connections are getting harder and harder to maintain, especially with age.
Mhm.
Like on one hand, we feel like it's a global world, right? And you're in touch with everyone everywhere, but you're not physically with people as much as we used to be.
Well, that's very true. I mean, that's one of numerous what we call systemic changes we have seen over the past approximately 30 years. Other changes include a decline in the stability of work,
Mhm.
stagnant wages, and the rise of fourth wave feminism, which has brought economic freedom to so many women. This is wonderful for women, but it has made competition in the workplace even more difficult for men. Um, there are some larger issues at play as well, including growing narcissism and self-obsession. I'm not going to name any names.
Oh, yeah, and that trickles down to the entire world, right? I mean, just seems to be a
Yeah.
something that hurts everybody. So is there evidence, from what we're hearing? Because again, I sought you out due to the fact that we keep hearing about a male loneliness epidemic. It's epidemic everywhere, but women tend to express it differently than men. Women are more apt to go out and look for things to do. So talk to me about this conundrum of men having almost everything they need as they get older as a rule, but then they're more lonely.
Yes, yes. So it's been confusing because, we've seen all these major reports beginning with the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy's 2023 advisory warning about Americans in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. We've seen the World Health Organization propose a global public health concern, and that's worldwide, of course. Um, and we've seen also survey reports now that show beyond a doubt that the experience of loneliness is approximately equal for men and women. So we'll have to conclude that men experience loneliness differently as compared to women. So the real question becomes, well, how do they experience it?
So many people live alone and it's increasing at an advanced age. Are older men lonelier than younger men?
That's a very good question. I would say that there are certainly many lonely older men,
Hmm.
but um, according to our best re research, there is a significant age difference uh, in reported loneliness. You have to remember the loneliness is a subjective feeling, so it's very difficult to measure. But the research shows now that that the situation is opposite of what we thought just a few years back. It turns out that approximately 79% of young men ages 15 to 24 report feeling lonely,
Hmm.
whereas for older men, 66 and over, this number drops to only 41%. So those young men, which is roughly Generation Z, are far more lonely.
This is the high school and college age you're talking about,
That's right.
and early
That's right.
career. That's at a
Hmm.
time when we make this assumption that kids have even if you're somewhat of a social outcast, you have a gazillion friends. There's stuff
Yeah.
going on. That's stunning to me that's what that's showing.
Yeah, and of course, it's good to keep in mind that both numbers are still too high.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh.
So where there's a lot of lonely people out there, and what holds men back from engaging in community the same way that women do? I'm
Hmm.
such an extrovert. I have, and I've learned over the years, now that I'm in my 60s, like to be a little more delicate with people that are introverts or, approach people. This is a little aside, Vic, that we didn't really discuss, but, sometimes people who aren't shy will say, "Hey, what's wrong with you? Come on, let's go. Let's get out. Let's do something." And people who are shy will retreat even further to somebody who's doing that to them. So, in an effort to make someone feel less lonely, we might even be making the situation worse and vice versa. So, um,
Hmm.
but, I find that, because I'll talk to anybody at any time that I try to, when I have, my male friends, I try to pull them out a little bit, same way that I do with my women friends. But what
Hmm.
holds men back from engaging in community the same way that women do?
Well, this is something I've seen in the men's groups I lead. It's pretty clear that men are far less likely to reach out to build um, friendship circles. That is individual with individuals who are not family.
Hmm.
Okay. So whereas women generally socialize within female clans, meaning that they all generally have a wide circle of friends, and there is no disconnect for women remaining close friends, going to lunch together, taking a walk together. Um, these are not things that men can do.
Hmm.
We have social restrictions against men's behavior and how it's expressed. So, if you think about what a friendship consists of, you have empathy, you have compassion, you have face-to-face discussion, and these are necessary mostly for friendships to bloom. Um, and for the most part, these are all aspects of behavior and socialization that men are not terribly good at doing.
I understand that there's also been changes in social connection or community involvement over the years. Like, what can you tell us about that? And I mean, men getting involved in their communities.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's very true. And once again, the statistics, while we're discussing men, um, the research on this shows that men and women equally are far less attached to their community,
Hmm.
or say 30 years ago. Um, but for men in particular, um, they they w were fairly recently engaged in things like civic clubs, religious groups, labor unions, community events of various kinds. And then, um, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, they were also members of fraternal organizations, um, such as the Elks Club the Odd Fellows, Freemasons, Knights of Columbus. My dad was a member of Knights of Columbus
Mhm, mhm.
and various veterans groups. And these were, organizations for men, some more secretive than others. But essentially, they were available as safe places for men to gather, and they were open to pretty much any fellow who expressed interest.
Mm, mhm.
Um, and that's just something we don't have today. The membership uh, um, of these organizations has like every one of them has sharply declined. So they might still be around, but it's more difficult. It's more difficult for men to engage in them.
That's
Mhm.
also like with scouting and 4-H clubs and all those
Mm.
things, when we were kids, kids joined
Mhm.
and your parents, both your mother and your father encouraged you to join, whether it's sports groups or civic groups and children were involved at a young age. But I still find it interesting that the men still hold back on forming those deep, 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 intimate um, emotional relationships with other men the way that women do in a non-sexual way. It's interesting. And men are less likely than women to report that they're lonely.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I've never, to this day, in all the groups I've led, I've never once heard a man actually say that. But it's really just it's a facade.
Mhm,
It's a restriction that we place on ourselves. Um, the theory being that we would or we might look weak or vulnerable if we say that, like I'm lonely.
mhm.
Um, and that's you know partly due to how I think men see themselves individually. So so for example, in the mindfulness work that we do uh, um, in the groups. Of course, just sitting together brings men closer.
Mhm.
It's an unusual activity, and that's useful in a way. But one of the key elements, actually, of mindfulness is what we call accept yourself, or think of yourself as a good friend. Um, and accept yourself just as you are.
Yeah.
All the positives, all the negatives, just accept it all. And this is very similar, I noticed, to one of the acronyms in your book.
Ah,
The self see everything like a friend. I mean, this is very similar concept. And so that does help a great deal. Um, but beyond that, beyond those one-to-one experiences, it's really hard to measure, what we think of as a negative bias. Like, how do we know that men tend not to report their loneliness?
right.
It's very difficult to measure that.
Mhm.
So,
There is something also with that if we feel, I think it's a lot of humans, our society has bred this in us that if there's something wrong or something makes you feel weak or less than or something that sets you apart, instead of getting out there and saying I need help with this because I feel left out or I feel we keep it to ourselves. Nobody wants to be ostracized or feel like they're the odd man out, which I think makes this probably even worse. And I read in your literature that upon separating from a marriage or intimate relationship, women report a twofold increase in loneliness, whereas men who will report it, a 13 times increase in loneliness. Interesting, Vic. Is that a perceived reliance on another person?
uh, so one of the serious mistakes that many men make, um, they become partnered or married, uh, is to invest the entirety of their social lives in their female partners or wives.
Mhm.
Um, they sit back, and many of them actually are much better at this
Mhm.
than they are. On the other hand, partnered or married tends to be quite the opposite. They tend to invest even more uh, social capital into their networks of friends and families. Relationships fail, they're called. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, is the way we face loneliness tied to the way we were raised and taught how to approach friendships?
Hmm. Yes. Certainly, uh, you know, I try very hard not to compare men and women,
Mhm.
um, because my my emphasis is on men. So I'll speak to that
Okay.
with regard to men. Um, we know today that nurture or gender socialization is a very powerful influence on men's behavior. So this model, first developed in the 90s, is known as the man box culture. Um, and it places numerous restrictions on our behavior. So we as men learn these from a very young age, you know, from from the bullies in the playground,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah.
What are they learning? To become how to become men. We learn to act tough, even in moments of fear or sadness. We learn to be self-sufficient, avoiding showing emotions. We learn to bring home the major income and avoid responsibility for household chores. I'm not making this stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. We learn to dominate women as sexual objects. And we, we learn to be competitive with peers, um, and avoid anything that may appear gay.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you put those all together, they're pretty severe restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah. And do younger men are not open to the changes in the world that women are experiencing now, the freedoms that women are experiencing?
I would say younger, it depends on what age group we're
Okay.
talking about, but younger men in general, I would say are much more open
Okay.
to those changes, and much more willing to, for example, engage in a relationship with a woman who who is in fact a feminist and expresses that point of view. So yeah, I think there is a difference, but it's a little tricky because you have to kind of pinpoint an age group to become any more accurate.
Yeah, yeah. So, two things I think, we've talked about this before is this whole thing of engagement with people that I think it's important to have somebody to go to, preferably a handful of people. We've talked about this. So you're not, like you're saying, a man might put all of his stake in a spouse. And then, upon, God forbid, a divorce or a death or something that breaks them up, um, then where do they go? What do they do? There's no social network, there's no support group. But
Hmm.
what stops men from having that casual lunch and that hangout date that women do? My girlfriends and I do that all the time. I'll say, okay, who can I call to go do da da da? And
Yeah.
you have friends who are good at all kinds of
Mhm.
different things, and that's who you call. And I'm very, very blessed that I have male friendships. I'm friends with men
Mhm.
from childhood, guys I grew up with. To this day, we're still really close friends, and nobody puts anything on it that there's any kind of, sexual connotation with it. We're just friends. We were little kids together. So I will often do that with male friends. Hey, I'm going to be in town. You want to have a cup of coffee? I don't think anything of it. But a lot of men do. A lot of men put a tremendous amount of weight on a going out for a cup of coffee.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. So this does go back to the man ball. Men are time masculine rule effectively enforced by their male peers. Now, that's an important point because if you think about it, the male peers are actually the same individuals with whom they might seek to be friends, and yet they're also the enforcers.
Yeah, yeah.
In other words, most men aren't aware of the man box until they make a mistake.
Hmm. Hmm.
And some guy in the locker room says, "Oh, stop acting like such a sissy," or some version of that. Um, and then if we think about the kinds of activities that men and women engage in, we see that men tend to favor what we call shoulder to shoulder activities, um, whereas rather than face to face activities. Women tend to favor face to face activities. Most men are very uncomfortable sitting face to face to each other,
Hmm.
especially alone. Um, and there are many exceptions, of course, and some men are becoming aware of this dynamic today. You know, whereas the previous generation, for example, our fathers probably thought of this as simply acting like a man.
Hmm. Hmm.
Today, younger people especially are beginning to realize that this is not just the nature of men. This is something imposed on us. And so they're beginning to break out of the pattern, especially I'll go back to Gen Z again,
Yeah, yeah.
which is great to see that. Um, and but if you're but if you're and I myself I'm 69 now. The chances are your dad assumed that that's the were
Right.
and took a lot of pride in it actually too.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
And often dismiss women as a result of that, and which is perceived by so many as abuse.
so you cut out for a moment there.
Yeah, yeah, I was
So
going to say we had
I,
a little glitch there, but
I couldn't hear the whole question.
okay. So, so men, said, okay, this is the way it is, and become dismissive of women's nurturing and what you call the weaker sex. And then it kind of, it drives them even further apart rather than saying, being um, compassionate about what men go through and what women go through and trying to come together. More recently we're doing that, but many people suffered
True.
that for many years about the communication problem because of
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
understanding what comes natural. I think men are from Mars and women are from Venus was born out of that, is trying to
Hmm.
figure out that communication gap between the two sexes, both in hetero and homosexual relationships. I think it all plays a role. Um,
Hmm.
let's discuss a little bit, Vic, what fuels the male loneliness epidemic. Starting with connectedness.
Okay. Okay. So, so just to reflect back, if I may, on something you just said, um, men can have women as friends. Um, most of them are not partnered.
Mm,
In other words, once we're partnered, we see it as a conflicting situation.
okay.
I'd have a woman as a friend, uh, especially to make a new friend who is a woman.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, usually old friends have a special status. This is my friend Karen from high school. That's a different status because that's a long-term friendship. That's generally considered acceptable. But to make a new friend with a woman, if I, as a man, am already partnered, which I am, um, seems a little tricky
Yeah.
because of the assumption that it may become an intimate relationship.
Hmm. Why is that the first place people go?
Ah, that's a good question. You know, it is. Um, so men will, and this is not my opinion. This is like everything I hear in my groups,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Um, um, Men will say things like um, that that they can't relate to a woman the same way they relate to a man.
Okay.
And that's pretty obvious. I mean,
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with that so far. Um, and and very often they will say that that makes them feel very uncomfortable. In other words, they so many think or assume, probably assume is a better word here, assume that women, well, exist for their pleasure, to put it
Okay.
directly.
Okay.
I can't think of any way to put it
Okay.
like other than that. So so if a woman is a is a friend, well, you might see that as well, you know, your own pleasure. I mean, obviously you're friends because it's enjoyable for both
Right.
people. Um, but some men will see it a bit awkwardly because they assume and perceive women as well as sexual objects.
Interesting. Yeah. So as a woman who likes having a lot of friends, I always feel like sometimes it's just a very innocent communication going on. And I hear that a lot because I guess what I'm getting at is, if men and women, doesn't matter, are feeling lonely, you could have friends of all walks of life, men and women, and old and
Hmm.
young. We should be open and free to be able to do that. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of self-imposed restrictions and social restrictions put on that. So that's what I was getting at earlier about, what we're going to go into is talking about, how do we remedy that with connections and communications. But if you have that barrier that you won't be some friends with someone based on an assumption, you've already cut out the whole group of people that potentially could be a social outlet for you.
Yes,
Hmm.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Um, and keep in mind also that men are doing this with other men as well.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, In other words, you know, I have a friend, Tom, attends Sunday service at local church. He meets a new fellow there that they get to talking, and then what? What happens next? Well, if these two are two women, what would happen next? You'd probably consider meeting for lunch or doing an activity together, or let me call you next week and we'll talk. Um, um, as two men, uh, uh, they're immediately confronted with this issue of what do we do next?
Hmm.
What can we do and not seem gay?
Right.
What can we do and not seem to be cheating on our wives? There are all these issues that come into play, and I could tell you from experience, it's difficult. It's a difficult challenge, you know. And what I do and what some men do to get around this is to bring that out into the open
Okay.
and say, you know, not to overtly acknowledge how awkward this feels, but we're going to meet for lunch anyway. You know, like you sort of plow through it. And so I certainly had that experience, and you know, it works great.
Mhm.
But not everyone's cut out for that. You know, it doesn't work for everyone.
It's so sad to me, Vic, in every aspect of our lives, whether it's developing friendships, what you're wearing, what you do for your job, how you conduct yourself, is that we care what other people think. That's my opening line in my book, Vic, is what's the number one key to aging well and to getting a handle on your own happiness is to not care what anybody thinks. And that's I think the number one hurdle. That's
Yeah.
everybody's Mount Everest, right? Is how do we get past that we care what people think? So you're in a small community and you're out having coffee with a guy, and everyone in town's going, what are they doing together having a cup of coffee? Like it's not, hey, great, these two guys are, they're two lonely old bachelors or whatever it might be. And
Hmm.
they're going out for coffee together. That's great. They're starting a friendship. It's the want, want, want about what they're doing wrong. It's just sad.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have more serious problems too.
Yeah.
It's not just about loneliness.
Mhm.
Loneliness is a serious problem, but I want to put it into perspective. Um, and so it's loneliness, and for men, loneliness is attached to anger and aggression, two other aspects of that man box I brought up earlier. Um, so it kind of encourages us to, if you're going to express any emotion, it better be anger.
Mm.
You
Mhm.
can't cry, you can't be sad, you can't, no, none of those things. But anger is okay.
Yeah.
This is the assumption I'm saying.
Mhm.
And aggression is okay. Um, so as a result of these, we have some very serious problems nowadays. Things like suicides and deaths of despair have increased almost 200% in the past
Mhm.
15 years
Mhm.
among men. That's a huge problem. We have toxic behaviors, Me Too behaviors still happening from men toward women.
Mhm.
Uh, we have rates of violence which are becoming violence among men is domestic violence,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
which is just a horrible thing. Um, and as you mentioned, loss of social connections. That may be the most obvious. It's also the rise of, of the manosphere groups, um, a portion of which, not all of it, but a portion of which is hate-filled and misogynistic. Again, very sad situation there. And they attract a lot of young men. Oh,
So that's, the communication and technology. We're going to touch on that a little bit. It's changed, and older adults are getting more comfortable with technology and online communication and things like that. But young men are on it now from the time, my daughter's in her 20s. She's had a cell phone from a very young age because I too became one of those parents that was frightened to let her go out by herself, forgetting that I did it until I didn't have a cell phone until she was born. Right. I mean, we survived it, but
yeah.
we do unfortunately or fortunately as parents buy into the fears, but kids can nowadays can hide behind technology. Older people are not as comfortable with that. So the younger people are developing friendships or relationships or work environments online. Older men don't are not as they're not as adept just because it's not something that they were born with, and it's a learning curve, much bigger learning curve for older people. And so I think that's changed, um, obviously how young kids communicate, but also how older people. I think that leads to even more isolation and loneliness. Is that you're not
I
on top
would,
of the tech all
I,
the time. You're some sort of outcast, right?
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree, and I would go a little further actually and say that um, part of the business model of social media is to make you feel lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's what you're saying about the different generations, I think is a real conundrum for anyone who's, say, older than 50s
Okay.
at this point. Um, you know, I try to send a text to a young person, a family member who's around old, and I never hear back. And
Mhm,
it turns out, oh, when I see him, he says, "Oh, I don't use SMS. I use WhatsApp or I use Discord."
mhm, mhm.
And I happen to know what those are,
Yeah,
but I don't use them typically. Okay, so I'll get on Discord for you.
yeah, yeah,
You can do that, but it's there is so much variety in personal technologies now that it's hard to keep up with what's popular and what's being used. So I would say yes, especially for the older generations. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. I experienced that too. I think in the early days of texting, that was a problem. People like, what's texting? They didn't even, and
Mm.
were on it
Hmm.
immediately. So here you have to look at your
Hmm.
phone and read something and get through the typos and the innuendos and the slang to figure out what somebody's trying to say to you instead of just pick up the phone and call and say, I'll meet you at the diner for lunch at 12 noon, instead if it's all, in our world convoluted, in their world they
Hmm.
actually get it. Vic, you had mentioned earlier also when we were talking before we got on was about how one's work life and one's career plays such a strong role in their identity, and that uh, as men get older and certainly reach retirement, and forced retirement wasn't that long ago, and still to this day there is it's another topic, but ageism and men getting let go from their jobs as early now as 50, right? Between
Hmm.
50, 55 and on, that's put a huge dent in socializing
Oh
for
yes,
men. Yeah.
yes for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think men in particular have always identified with work for a couple of reasons. I think it's a way for most uh, men to demonstrate their competence, and competency is very important to the male ego.
Yeah.
Very, very important. Um, it's also a common way of socializing. Work is not that different from a football game.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
might be sitting at a desk, but um, you're still engaged in a common activity. It's a common framework, and so men generally feel more comfortable and more. Uh, it's a more stable situation for them
Hmm.
socially as
Hmm.
well as in terms of competence. Yeah,
It's
so work
it's a
is important.
it's a safe place to be social. Also, work is really a
Hmm.
in a
Hmm.
funny way, you can be friends with anybody. You can be friends with the opposite sex. You can be friends with young kids. You can be friends with older people, and kind of leave it at the door at 5 o'clock, right? You can have this really fun. Hopefully, it works in that way. That you have this fun, vibrant environment, and you can go
Hmm.
home and say, okay, I had my work day and I had my social outlet, and you're done for the day. But without that, I can see. Um, how all of a sudden you'd feel really lost. You got up every day and you saw so and so at the coffee machine, or you engaged in whatever meetings, and it's beautifully social. I wish people viewed work more on a social level. There's so much information out there now that they're not your friends, they're your colleagues, or your boss is not your friend. You're there to do a job. I'm not here to make any friends. This isn't a popularity contest. I'm here to get the job done and earn you hear these phrases, right? And to
Yeah,
me, it's
yeah.
like the total opposite. It's like, oh my God, there's a whole wide world of people out there that you can learn from and be around. So that's always been an interesting thing for me that people have that attitude towards work. Because
Hmm.
that's a
Hmm.
beautiful place to and we wanted to we're getting close to time, but I wanted to I was hoping to spend a little more time on this, but you wrote romantic disillusionment. It's modern dating, social media, this competitive landscape of who's choosing who, and thousands of pictures, and half of them are probably fake, and AI, artificial intelligence, making this 10 times worse. I wish we could go back to the old fashioned dating as you meet somebody and in person. And for me, there's too much online of that. That's yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yes, a lot of men are disillusioned, and increasingly more women actually
Yeah.
with the dating apps. I mean, they're pretty awful, I have to say, in general. I know. And yes, for men, it creates a competitive environment because they feel like they're being kind of assessed for a job or evaluated or compared to other men, which none of which feels good. Um, and
Yeah, I think the worst part about it is that you're being scrutinized in a very negative way.
yeah.
It's this this checklist and this, there isn't just that natural spark and getting to know each other in an easy, casual way. Vic, there's
Mhm.
so much to cover here, so much to unpack, if you will. That's a new word, unpack, right? We didn't use that word when we were younger, but it's a
Mhm.
good one. I like it. And I just want to say collectively, if we could all work towards, helping people feel comfortable, encouraging people to share, encouraging people to be out there and take chances and be vulnerable, and try to find ways to be more social and to find friends. And, of course, in closing, I want to say without sounding too kumbaya, but men and women can be friends. Men can be friends with other men, and it's never too late
Mhm.
to make new friends. I can't encourage that enough. And I want to thank you so much, Vic Caldarola, for joining us today. And for more information about Vic and the Shine a Light Men's Project, go to www.shinealightmensproject.net, and we will put that up when the show is available. Vic, can you tell us what you like about getting older?
Me?
Yes, you.
Well, sure. I would say I know myself better, and I'm much more comfortable and at ease um, um, with relationships, and much more comfortable with stepping beyond that man box.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and if I may, I'd like to leave your viewers with a quote from Woody Allen, which is one of my favorites. He said, "Life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's all over too soon."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
I like that. Yeah. That's it. It's food for thought for sure, for sure. So again, thank you so much, Vic Caldarola, for joining us today. And I want to thank all of you who are listening for being here on It's Okay to Be Old. And please subscribe to my channel, Patricia Greenberg, for more engaging discussions on all things aging well. And for feedback and topic requests, you can contact me at www.patriciagreenberg.com. Thank you again, Vic. And I look
yeah,
forward to more conversation
thank,
on this.
thank
Okay.
you for having me.
You're welcome.